and welcome to Crimes Through Time, snapshots of crime history. This case was a pivotal one in English legal history. The killers of Anne and Thomas Farrow would become the first to be convicted of murder using fingerprint identification. At 8:30 a.m. on Monday the 27th of March 1905, William Jones arrived for work. He was an errand boy at Chapman Oil and Colour Shop, 34 Deptford High Street, South London. He was confused to find the shop closed and shuttered. The paint shop was managed by Thomas Farrow, aged 71, and his wife Anne, 65. They lived in the flat above the shop and would usually be at work by now. When knocking received no answer, he peeped into the window and saw signs of a struggle. Immediately he ran to get help from Lewis Kidman, a local resident, and together they forced a way into the shop. Thomas was found dead on the floor, and Anne was found unconscious but alive in the couple's bed. They had been beaten. The police and doctors were summoned, and Anne was rushed to hospital. The shop was in disarray, as if someone had been hurriedly searching for something. There were no signs of forced entry. It soon became clear the motive was robbery. William told the police that Thomas would collect the week's takings and deposit them in the bank every Monday morning. This was confirmed when an empty cash box was found on the floor, which should have contained around £13, equivalent to about $1,800 in 2024. The box had been moved from its original position by Sergeant Albert Atkinson to avoid the doctor who was tending to Anne falling over it. He had used his bare hands to do so. Chief Inspector Frederick Fox and Melvin McNaughty, the Assistant Crime Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and head of the Criminal Investigation Department, took over the case. Evidence from the crime scene gave the police a working theory of what had happened that morning. The couple were both dressed in their nightclothes, but they had been attacked separately. 2 masks were found at the scene, fashioned from black stockings, indicating that 2 attackers were involved. Thomas most likely was woken by the door and whilst half asleep was convinced to let them in, maybe using a ruse. He was then attacked and rendered unconscious by one assailant, the other running upstairs and beating Anne while she was still in bed. Together they then ransacked the shop, looking for the takings. When they found the cash box, they pried it open and took the money. Blood pooling showed Thomas must have woken up at some point and was beaten further. The now killers washed their hands in a nearby sink before fleeing the scene. When McNaughton was told about the cash box, he chose to examine it. On the underside of the box's inner tray, there was a greasy smudge which appeared to contain a fingerprint. He was a member of the Belper Committee, a group set up by Lord Belper in 1900 to look into techniques that could be used for personal identification for police purposes. The committee had recommended the use of fingerprints as one such method 5 years ago. He decided that this would be the right case for using fingerprint techniques. He used his handkerchief to carefully pick up the box, wrapped it in paper, and took it to the new fingerprinting bureau at Scotland Yard. The bureau was established on the 1st of July 1901. It was headed by Detective Inspector Charles Stockley Collins. He was regarded as the foremost English fingerprint expert. This was a brave move. To use such a new technique in such a serious case, they were asking for public ridicule and intense scrutiny. And even if they succeeded in identifying the owner of the fingerprint, they then had to convince a jury sufficiently of the reliability of fingerprint comparison for them to convict. Collins determined that the print was made through perspiration and appeared to be left by the thumb of the person's right hand. He compared them to the Farrows as well as Detective Sergeant Atkinson, who moved the cash box and was able to eliminate them all. At this time, the Bureau had about 80,000 to 90,000 sets of prints on file, but no match was found. they would need to find a suspect first. Unfortunately, any hopes of Anne identifying or describing the attackers were lost on the 31st of March, when she passed away, having never regained consciousness. The police turned to more tried and tested methods, canvassing for witnesses. Several people came forward saying they saw two men, one dressed in a dark brown suit and cap, and the other in a dark blue serge suit and bowler hat, leaving the paint shop around 7:30 in the morning of the 27th of March, about an hour before William arrived for work. Henry John Littlefield, a professional boxer, and his girlfriend Ellen Stanton were able to identify the one in the dark brown suit as Alfred Stratton, aged 22. Alfred didn't have a criminal record, so his prints weren't in the Bureau records, but he was known to the police for vagrancy and did have contacts in the criminal world. Alfred had a brother, Albert Ernest Stratton, aged 20, and the description of the other attacker matched him. Alfred's girlfriend, Hannah Annie Cromarty, gave a statement to the police that further incriminated him. She told them he had disposed of his dark brown coat and shoes the day of the murder and had asked her for an old pair of stockings, which she had given him. Warrants for the pair were issued and they were taken into custody on the 2nd of April and fingerprinted. Annie then gave the police a tip about where they could find some of the stolen money. £4 was recovered buried near a local waterworks. Collins compared the set of fingerprints with the prints from the cash box. He concluded that the right thumbprint of Alfred Stratton matched exactly. Detective Inspector Charles Stedman confirmed Collins's findings. The brothers were charged with murder and the trial opened on the 5th of May 1905 at the Old Bailey in front of Mr. Justice Channel. Richard Muir was the prosecutor for the Crown. Convincing the jury that the matched fingerprint was reliable evidence was going to be a formidable challenge, but one he was fully prepared for. The defence retained Henry Folds, also a pioneer in fingerprinting. He held the belief that one fingerprint was not enough of a match to give a reliable identification. They also retained Dr. John George Garson, who believed that there were other more reliable methods than fingerprinting for identification of persons. Both were rivals of Edward Henry, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, who established the Fingerprint Bureau and who was responsible for the introduction of fingerprinting into the English legal system. He was also in attendance at the trial. The prosecution called over 40 witnesses. While Muir, Mr. Bodkin and his team had a distrust of eyewitness testimony, they realised they needed more traditional and expected ways of placing the suspects at the scene that would then go on to support the fingerprint identification. Henry and Ellen testified, as well as milkman Henry Alfred Jennings. The Home Office pathologist who conducted the post-mortems on Anne and Thomas testified that the weapons used to beat the couple were consistent with tools found in the brothers' possession. Kate Wade, Albert's girlfriend, testified he was not with her the night of the murder, which was unusual. And Annie, Alfred's girlfriend, also took to the stand, stating he returned home the morning of the murder with a fair amount of money and that he refused to explain where it had come from. He also threw out the clothes he wore that day, and when he saw the reports of the murder in the newspapers, he asked her to say she was with him that morning if anyone should ask. Defence counsel H.G. Ruth, Curtis Bennett and Harold Morris were so confident that they could present a plausible alternative explanation of events that they let Alfred Stratton take the stand. It was a mistake. He told the jury that he had been woken by his brother Albert around 2:30 a.m. when he threw rocks at his window asking to borrow money for a place to stay. He said he would check what he had spare, and when he returned to the window, Albert was gone. He left home to find Albert, and he caught up to him some way away, right near the paint shop, coincidentally, which is why people saw them both in the area. They both then returned to Alfred's lodgings, and Albert slept on the floor, and they stayed there until 9 in the morning. Why he didn't just let him in and let him sleep on the floor straight away, I don't know. He completely dismissed the testimony of Annie. Her testimony, according to Alfred, was just all fabrication so that she could get revenge on him for his ill treatment of her. He explained that the £4 he had won at a boxing contest months before, and he had buried the money 3 weeks prior to the murder, and he had always intended to give the money to Annie. Muir anticipated this tactic, and he called William Gittings, who worked in the jail where the brothers were being held. He recalled a conversation he had with Albert, in which he said to William, quote, "I reckon he, Alfred, will get hung up for this. I shall get about 10 years. He has led me into this." Muir hoped that this would sound enough like a confession to the jury. Then Collins took the stand. It was time to talk about the fingerprints. Muir first established Collins' credentials so that he could be viewed as an expert by the jury. He then discussed the fingerprints found at the scene, demonstrating how they matched with 12 points of agreement. In answer to a juror's query, he also demonstrated the difference in a print caused by various levels of pressure. In rebuttal, Dr. Garson then took to the stand for the defence. He was established as a mentor of Collins. He was a more expert. He testified that he couldn't be certain of a match. But Muir had been thorough in his research of Garson. He had actually spoken against fingerprinting in the Belper Committee. He was a staunch supporter of other rival fields of identification. He would gain if fingerprints were discredited at trial. Muir then had an ace up his sleeve. He produced 2 letters written by Garson, one to the Director of Public Prosecutions and the other to the Solicitor of the Defence, offering to testify for either side of the trial, depending on who paid more money. The judge, Mr. Justice Channell, remarked that after writing 2 such letters, he deemed Dr. Garson, quote, "an absolutely untrustworthy witness," and suggested that the jury do the same. After Dr. Garson had his credibility shredded on the stand, they decided not to call Dr. Folds in case he suffered a similar fate. It took the jury just over 2 hours of deliberations to return a guilty verdict for both Alfred and Albert, making the Stratton brothers the first in England to be convicted of murder using fingerprint evidence. On the 6th of May 1905, they were sentenced to death. They were hanged together on the 23rd of May at Wandsworth Prison. The double execution was carried out by John Billington with 2 assistants, Henry Pierrepoint and John Ellis. The cash box and the fingerprint cards are now on display in the Crime Museum in New Scotland Yard. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.